The FaceTime is all real well. It isn't the same, is it? You really want to give people a hug every now and then.
I've lost 2 members of my family to this COVID-19. I'm pretty scared right now.
Young people that disrupt science and provide the benefits for tomorrow.
I certainly hope our new world is one where people can come together.
The kind of chaos we're seeing in American cities is a direct result of a very faulty policy of locking people in their homes.
We still don't know where this coronavirus first made the jump to humans.
There's no cover-up, there's no delay. China's record is clean.
A very good evening, I'm Dermot Murnahan. Now, over the course of this week, I'm going to be speaking to some of the leading lights in culture, politics, economics and science. And tonight we're joined by the former Foreign Secretary, David Miliband, by Mary Robinson, who was the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights and President of Ireland, and indeed now leads the fight for what she calls climate justice. We've also got the historian, Professor Neil Ferguson, who thinks COVID-19 could be here to stay for a while. We're also joined by China's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Liu Xiaoming. Now, facing them, a live virtual studio audience from around the world who will be asking questions about how we can hope to forge a new future. We start tonight with the global challenges and how the virus will reshape our world at large.
The virus has spread to every region of China.
Recognize a super spreading event before it goes explosive.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern.
The whole of Italy will face the most draconian restrictions since the Second World War.
It isn't empty, it's full of people, but they are all self-isolating.
Is a tsunami. Don't think that can't happen everywhere else.
Boris Johnson has tested positive for coronavirus.
I'm self-isolating.
The number of dead in New York is climbing and the morgues are running out of space.
The patients keep coming, and it's not just the elderly.
How is it?
Hell. Biblical.
I see the disinfectant, and is there a way we can do something like that by injection?
We're supposed to be practicing social distancing. It's really difficult in a community like this.
Digging thousands upon thousands of graves in the city of Sao Paulo.
Men, women and children have walked for many miles.
Mexico City's crematorium can't cope. They're at full capacity already.
We may have won a few battles, but we have not won the war.
We all need somebody to lean on, lean on. When you're not strong, I'll be your friend. I'll help you care.
It's about doing the sort of things that we take for granted.
There was a sense of release and a hope that perhaps the worst is over.
Across the world, a planet in pandemic paralysis is looking different.
If you need a
I want to bring in the first question from our virtual audience. Eamon, what would you like to ask this evening?
Post-pandemic, does the panel see an urgent need for reform of global institutions such as the UN, World Health Organization, and the European Union? Or are we likely to see an increased fragmentation between member state participants?
I'd put 3 things on the table straight away. First of all, we need a better, a more independent World Health Organization. The truth is its weaknesses reflect the fact that it's tied down by its membership structure. It needs to be more independent. Secondly, we need a better funded and more independently funded World Health Organization so that it's able to carry out its work without worrying what the member states who fund it will say. And thirdly, and I think critically, we need a World Health Organization that is more powerful, that is able to do independent inspections, that it's able to partner with the private sector more effectively, as well as with NGOs. And I think if we can get the reform of the World Health Organization right, it could set a template for a wider set of institutions that also need to be got right.
Neil Ferguson, given that analysis of the WHO and how it's performed during this crisis, does President Trump have a point? It's in China's pocket, and he's right to withdraw its funding by the United States.
Well, I can't agree with President Trump on this, because withdrawing the United States only increases the probability that the WHO will become beholden to China or one of the other great powers, because let's not kid ourselves. With all due respect to my old friend David Miliband, the international order set up after World War II was designed to be dominated by the great powers. And we seem to be back to Cold War, only this time it's China in the role of the Soviet Union. It is not politicization to ask for clear answers from China to the question, what happened in December and January? We need to know. We still don't know where this coronavirus first made the jump to humans, except that it was in Wuhan. But whether it was in a wet market or a laboratory, we still do not know. Although flights out of Wuhan were restricted on the 23rd, flights continued from all the other Chinese airports, and they clearly transported the virus to Europe as well as to the United States and other countries.
I'm very sorry to hear so many Cold War rhetorics from Neil. You know, we know each other before, but I don't know why, he is so interested in having a Cold War with China. I just want to let you know, China is not a former Soviet Union. You, being a historian, you really should have a serious study of China. I want to put aside, I can provide you with more information, more facts. We have this 24 reality check. I will mail it to you. I just want to say we shouldn't talk down the role played by WHO. We shouldn't, because WHO spoke positively about the efforts of China. WHO is a very important international organization, which has 120.
Just Ambassador, sorry, I just have to bring you back, to the Chinese responsibility. Undoubtedly, and we know this, that China was in denial about COVID-19 for so long, about animal-to-human transmission, about human-to-human transition. You didn't tell the world soon enough.
As I told you, we lost no time in informing WHO. This is a new virus. You have to be responsible. It's unknown to all of us. So you will need scientists to study in a responsible way and seriously. I think we identified this new virus 12 days after the first report. Then we immediately report to WHO and share this information with countries, relevant countries. There's no cover-up, there's no delay. China's record is clean. It can stand the test of time and history. What I'm also saying, China first report the virus, it does not mean the virus originated from China. In terms of origin, I think it's up to the scientists to decide.
We conducted a wide-ranging poll for this programme of what the public thinks about the future, so let's share it with you. In our exclusive survey, we asked, looking forward, what is the biggest issue that the world needs to address? Now, take this in, because 33%, a third of those polled, said the environment and climate change were well ahead then of the 15%, less than half, who said preventing future pandemics.
We need to just go green with investment, jobs, insulating houses and buildings, and also the biodiversity side, the rewilding, the understanding of our link with nature, the real need for the kind of support that young people in particular get, that Indigenous people have been telling us about for years. There's a lot of wisdom around, if only we'd listen to it.
Let's turn to you, panel. Get your arms ready again. Raise your hands. Here's the question. If you trust your government to do the right thing, wherever you are, do you trust your government to do the right thing? Wow. So about 5 hands in total there. What's that? About 10% of you. OK, how many of you trust Donald Trump to work with other countries to build a better future? Donald Trump, how many of you trust Donald Trump to work with other countries to build a better future? Well, And lots of shaking heads and no hands raised. What about the Chinese government? Same question. What do you think about the Chinese government, its ability to work with other countries to build a better future? Well, perhaps a dozen of you or so. But I've got to ask the ambassador finally on this lack of trust, particularly with younger generations, where you are seeing that on the streets of Hong Kong and the Chinese state's repression of those protesters, those seekers after democracy.
No, it's not a Chinese suppression. What is going on in Hong Kong is violence. It's totally it's a risk to the national security. These perpetrators storm the parliament, the legislature, as we call it, and they even put on fire the innocent people. If the same thing happened in the street of London, if the rioters storm the UK Parliament, what will be UK reaction? The UK government, police will sit back and let the things going on? I think any responsible government has to take measures.
We have a Nobel Prize-winning economist, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, the former chief executive of BP, Lord Brown. We also have the economist Stephanie Kelton, former advisor to the US Democratic Party, and joining them, Stephen Moore, a member of President Trump's coronavirus task force for the economy. Welcome to you all. So with jobs, finance and economics now under a strain not felt for many generations, tonight we look at the future for the economy and the world of work.
There's nothing anywhere.
Aisles are empty and there's just people as far as the eye can see.
I'm a critical care nurse. I've just finished 48 hours of work. There's no fruit, there's no vegetables. Just stop it.
Consider the impact their stocking up might have on others.
This is Regent Street, home to some of the biggest names in retail, and it's almost deserted.
They're talking about the economy contracting by 35%.
That would be the biggest quarterly fall we've ever seen.
The UK is facing a significant recession.
British Airways are set to make up to 12,000 workers redundant.
Virgin Atlantic Airways is to cut more than 3,000 jobs today.
IB is shortly being put into administration.
It's all over, it's all gone. It's really sad.
It's unique in modern times. We've never seen anything like this.
For the first time in our history, the government is going to step in and help to pay people's wages.
F1 cars are out. Ventilator trolleys are in. The sheer scale and speed of what's happening here is clearly a triumph.
You feel so much more protected.
We are seeing the indomitable spirit of Britain.
Cheers.
The estate's online sales are up nearly 2,000%.
There are some fantastic ideas out there where, if we ever get over this, the world has to change.
Well, we're getting families ordering direct to the house. People have started cooking again.
I do think that the British tourism industry is going to hit the roof now.
It won't be just going back, it will be a new normal.
Very important question coming up from one of our virtual audience. This is from Amber Curry in Oxfordshire. Please fire away, Amber.
Hello, thanks for having me. As a recent graduate, I'm worried about how I can enter an industry that is so reliant on face-to-face contact. I've deferred my master's as a result of COVID-19, but will I be able to gain industry experience in the meantime? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Amber. Very important. And Joseph Stiglitz, we've touched on this already, but let's address it directly. This crisis is generational. It's young people who are not getting training, not going to get jobs, to save older people. That's what the statistics tell us about coronavirus.
Yes, we've had a generational divide. It's actually been going on for a long time. One of the problems is that wages have been stagnant. And this has been particularly true in recent years. And part of the reason is unfettered capitalism hasn't been working for ordinary individuals. At the bottom, the wages in the United States, for instance, are the same as they were 60 years ago.
Stephanie Kelton, can I ask you what we're seeing on the streets of so many American cities at the moment? Yes, of course, sparked by a racist killing, but we're seeing many young people in particular. There's unemployment, there's inequality rife in the United States and indeed countries like the one I'm in at the moment. Is this perhaps one of the outcomes that we could continue to see from this crisis?
I mean, people in distress will take to the streets and let you know that they are in distress. So at the moment, you're right. What we're seeing are a lot of protests that are being driven by the fact that, you know, we continue to see again and again and again in this country, police officers taking the lives of African Americans, murdering them on the streets. We see these images all the time. It's festering. It's coming with the backdrop of COVID-19, where we're all uniquely, keenly aware of the fact that the frontline workers who bore disproportionately the pain associated with job losses, income losses, and so forth were people of color. So we see the inequities. We see how unfair this is. What you have are Blacks and whites and Latinos and Asians, Americans and Native people are coming together to say this is unjust, all of it, not just the killings, but the whole of the system is rotten. And people are saying we are not going to stand for an economic and social system that operates this way in the future.
Stephen Moore, well, clearly, obviously not to be condoned, but is it understandable then what is happening on the streets of these American cities?
Is it understandable? Well, I think the better question is it justifiable? And I think almost everyone agrees that this criminal behavior has to stop. And I think President Trump is right that we have to stop the rioting and looting. It is outrageous. It is hurting the very people in these communities that have been afflicted by, with low incomes and so on. So it's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing we're seeing in these cities. And frankly, I think Americans are sick and tired of people apologizing for really radical behavior that, as I said, is hurting these very people who are supposed to be benefiting from this. Now, look, we have two Americas right now. We have an America of red states. That's what's kind of unique about the United States, that the states really do run the show. And we have red states like Georgia and Florida and Texas and Tennessee that are booming, absolutely booming, have had twice the rate of growth and twice the rate of job creation over the last 20 years. And then you have these states like New York and Connecticut and New Jersey and my home state of Illinois and other states that are run by Democrats that have been run into the ground. And those are the places where the riots have been worse. So why don't we use the policies that work? Lower taxes, lower regulation. I'm not saying we shouldn't have any regulations. I'm saying we should reward our businesses for hiring people and doing a great job and expanding. And look, we had a great economy 2.5 months ago. There was no unemployment. There were 6 million surplus jobs in this country. It was the best labor market we ever had. We've got to get back to those policies. But no, we can never justify violence, and we can never justify people burning down buildings and spray painting obscenities on churches. We can't tolerate that.
Of course, no one's justifying it. The question was if we can understand the forces that are driving it. I just want to bring Amber back in there because, Amber, I saw you reacting to that, and I don't know what your thoughts were. So share them with us, what you're hearing there.
And I can't speak as I'm not an American, but it to me really seems like it's not about looting and violence. And I think the violence that needs to be stopped is coming more from the police rather than any protesters.
OK, well, thank you for that input, Amber. And I just want to hear from Lord Brown. And let's broaden this out about young people like Amber. They're the seed capital of future society, of future economies. If we get this wrong, we could be in trouble.
Absolutely, we must not get it wrong. The problem is judging it in the middle of the turmoil of today, where there's a lot of people without jobs because there's not a lot of activity. But again, I come back to, building a different world requires a lot of different skills, and that world will be different. Just simply the amount and changing of the way we live and work, what we're doing today on Skype, for example, will change the demands we have on infrastructure, the demands we have on the cloud, the demands we have on all sorts of things. This will require a lot more effort.
I want to put a straw poll to our audience. By a show of hands, do you think the cure in the shape of the economic lockdown could prove worse than the disease itself? Hands up if you think the lockdown is worse than the virus. Well, that is just a handful, I'd say, 3 or 4. Another question for you then, audience, I'm just jotting that down. Hands up if you think that governments have generally, that have done it, if you think that governments have generally lifted lockdown too soon. Hands up if you think governments have generally lifted or started lifting their lockdowns too soon. What do you think about that? Stephen Moore, can I bring you in here and ask you your view on that? Did this have to be done? Did there have to be almost global lockdowns, with a few exceptions?
Well, I can really only talk about the United States, but I think that what has happened over the last 2 or 3 months in the United States will go down in history as one of the greatest economic tragedies and one of the biggest political blunders of our time. The idea of shutting down our economy was a catastrophic decision, not just for our economy, but the health effects of the coronavirus shutdown and lockdown have been arguably worse than what would have happened if we'd simply let people make their own decisions about whether to go out. And I'll make one other point. You all know that we're seeing these horrendous riots around the United States in major cities. These riots are a direct result of the lockdown. You can't keep the American people, especially young people, locked in their homes for 2 or 3 months and expect anything but this. And so I think that the kind of chaos we're seeing in American cities is a direct result of a very faulty policy of locking people in their homes.
Professor Stiglitz, just a quick rejoinder to that.
I just have to respond very strongly. The protests in the United States are a result of police brutality. 50 years of police brutality, in fact, 150 years of police brutality. It is a result of a kind of brutality that has been inflamed by President Trump's vicious rhetoric. And that is the reason that our country is burning today.
We're joined by the director of the Wellcome Trust and a member of the government's SAGE committee, Sir Jeremy Farrar. We've also got the former commissioner of the US Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, Dr. Margaret Hamburg. Very good to have you. Joining them, Dr. John Nkengasong, director of the Africa Centres for Disease Control. And our quartet is completed with Professor Dame Sally Davis, the former Chief Medical Officer for England. Welcome all. So, with the world forced to confront the biggest health crisis in generations, tonight we look at the future of science and medicine.
The coronavirus has hit the UK.
Is that really what it looks like?
One British man who likely contracted the virus in Singapore. He then travelled to a French ski resort, then returned from France to the UK.
We don't know the source of the outbreak, and we don't understand its severity.
The first confirmed death in Britain from coronavirus.
Stay at home, protect our NHS, and save lives.
This used to be a theatre. Just how much has been cancelled and sacrificed.
My wife isn't allowed to come with me anymore, and I'm missing her terribly.
These NHS workers who lost their lives were all at a greater risk.
As a community, we are put at risk every single day.
For a mother then to not be able to
grief, it's unimaginable.
Allah.
And how those death tolls have grown.
World Health Organization now says the coronavirus outbreak is a pandemic.
NHS staff are risking their own safety.
I understand people's anxieties on the front line.
If they don't do something really quickly for the care home, God forbid, they are going to die.
They want to discharge people, but they don't want to test.
Sometimes I'll sit in a bath and I'll cry.
The Prime Minister has been taken into an intensive care unit.
The NHS has saved my life, no question.
This is a very easy way for me to support the cause.
This is probably the biggest step forward since the crisis began.
Government wants to rely on self-reporting rather than tests.
I just thought I might die. Thank you. I'm not going to cry because they've looked after me so well.
So let's dive straight in. Let's get our first question from our audience tonight. This comes from Lindsay Forbes, who's on the Costa Blanca in Spain. Good evening, Lindsay. Please kick us off with your question.
Will there be an effective vaccine, or is it more likely that we will need to find effective medical treatments, as was the case with HIV? I have another reason for asking this question. The world needs an effective vaccine, but the fatality rate for the old and compromised is frighteningly high. We need better treatments as soon as possible, so that people are no more worried about catching COVID than they are about catching the flu.
OK, so right into the meat of it. Vaccines, and short of that, a treatment or treatments. Let's kick off with Sir Jeremy Farrar then, and a very good evening to you. Well, let's talk about vaccines first of all. We hear about these, well, I suppose they're up into the three figures of testing and trials and development going on, and some of them, a large handful, are now in human trials. Are you confident we're going to get a vaccine soon?
Yes. What soon means, I don't know. And I think the question that's come is absolutely the right question to ask. I was a junior doctor at the start of the HIV epidemic in the mid-1980s. And of course, at that time, we also thought we would have a vaccine. I spent a lot of my life working on tuberculosis and malaria. And the truth is, we still don't have vaccines for those diseases either. We cannot put all of our hopes on a vaccine.
Dr. Nkengasong, very good evening to you. And can I ask you from the African perspective, how high up the agenda of vaccine development is one for COVID-19? Presumably it would be more use to Africa to get one for something like malaria.
Absolutely. The continent as a whole is extremely engaged and concerned with issues related to access to COVID-19 vaccines when they subsequently become available. We always remind ourselves of what happened in 1996 when HIV antiretroviral treatment was available, but it took so many years before it became available on the continent of Africa, and so many lives were lost due to that.
David, I know you're in Guildford in Surrey. Would you please put your question to the panel?
Do you believe that we still run a serious risk of a second wave or a future mutation of COVID-19, maybe called COVID-20, later this year?
Professor Davis, what are your thoughts on that? Some say it could go, COVID-19 could go the way of SARS or MERS, other coronaviruses that seem to disappear and not come back.
Well, so far, the countries that seem to have got rid of it then still have cases popping up. And while it's rattling round and round the world, it'll be very difficult to get rid of. If you think about flu, it is in the northern hemisphere, then it goes to the southern, it may mutate, but then it comes back round. And it just goes round year after year with different strains and different changes. Though I'm not a forecaster or a modeler, I would prefer to be prepared for a second wave and even maybe a third wave. When we look back at 2009-10, the mild flu pandemic, we had 3 waves. And so we can expect more of this. The question is it a big wave, or is it, because of the way we handle it, lots of little waves? It'll go on until we are immune.
Well, let's reveal some of our polling. All week we've been revealing the results of a wide-ranging opinion poll that we conducted for these programmes about the future facing the world. Now, this is one of the questions we asked. Will the pandemic lead to health services in Britain getting better or worse? And these were the results. 43% of those surveyed told us they thought health services would be better. 8% thought they would get worse. Good evening to you, Rakshanda. What would you like to ask?
What can we do to make our NHS stronger?
Right, so what can we do to make our NHS stronger? One thing for sure that will strengthen the NHS is a preventative strategy.
You know, there are some wonderful things going on. It's not just the response that these great staff and all the key workers are making, and we now recognise it's not just doctors and nurses, but we're also seeing that community care and GP care is now much more digital. We weren't getting there before, and then overnight, and don't we all like it? It's much better.
So, Jeremy, your thoughts on that? What are you seeing? What are you hopeful about?
I think my most hopeful thing, which will also, I'm quite sure, happen, is that the interest in this, and it's, you know, it has captivated the whole scientific world, that will draw into the whole area of infectious diseases, of vaccines, of drug development, of immunology, all of the things we have to understand. It will draw another generation of young people into that, just as people were drawn actually at the start of the HIV epidemic. And it was those young people coming into science that actually provided the answers in the end to the HIV epidemic. And it will be the same with this pandemic as well. When you have something like this, it galvanizes people, funding flows into it from research agencies, and young people come into it. And inevitably, it's young people that disrupt science and provide the benefits for tomorrow.
We consider our society and culture. With us, a new live virtual studio audience, once again joining us from around the world. They're going to provide the questions about how we can build a new future. Very welcome to you all. Now, answering them, Nicola Mendelsohn, the Vice President of Facebook in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. We've also got the musician and Professor of Poetry, Benjamin Zephaniah. The author and journalist, Lionel Shriver, who thinks the lockdown should never have happened. And our quartet tonight is made up, completed with the Astronomer Royal and futurologist Professor Rees, who says the fate of future generations will depend on how we respond to this pandemic. Very good evening to you all. But before then, we can hear now from the Prince of Wales, who has spoken exclusively to our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, about his experience of coronavirus and what life might be like after the pandemic.
I wanted to start off by asking you, what have been your reflections of the impact that this pandemic has had on our country?
I can't tell you how much I sympathise with the way everybody has had to endure this unbelievably testing and challenging time. And I know that so many people have had the agony of losing, you know, their loved ones, and the bewilderment and anxiety that surrounds everything. And so it is the most awful aspect of a pandemic like this, and yet we've seen at the same time people being quite remarkable and wonderful people in the National Health Service and all the other key workers who've kept everything going.
What do you think it has taught us about our priorities? What really matters in life at the moment?
We have to put nature back at the centre of everything we do, and put it at the centre of our economy, which is, before this, nature's just been pushed to the peripheries. We've exploited and dug up and cut down everything as if there was no tomorrow, if it didn't matter. We have to find a way this time to put nature back at the centre. We should have been treating the planet as if it was a patient long ago.
You had the virus yourself. How much did that motivate you to look at what can be done next and where we go forward?
I was lucky in my case, and got away with it quite lightly. but I've had it, and I can so understand what other people have gone through.
People are just desperate to see their families, really, aren't they? It's a challenging time.
Well, I mean, I haven't seen my father for a long time. He's going to be 99 next week, and so yes, all my grandchildren or anything. So I've been doing, well, the FaceTime is all very well.
How has that been for you, being disconnected from your family?
It's terribly sad, let alone one's friends. But I mean, fortunately, you know, at least you can speak to them on telephones and occasionally do this sort of thing. But it isn't the same, is it? You really want to give people a hug every now and then.
The Prince of Wales there on the stresses that coronavirus has placed on all families over the last few months. And that chimes with our first question from our virtual audience tonight. It comes from Natasha Ekwazor, who's in South East London. Very good evening to you, Natasha, and very good evening to all our audience there. Natasha, would you get us started, please, with your question?
Will our social relationships ever be the same as they were pre-COVID? Surely everyone has an inner fear or lack of trust about the people they interact with from now onwards.
Good question. Well, I tell you what, let's stay with our audience and let's ask you all about Natasha's question. How many of you actually agree with her that people are now more mistrustful of people you interact with now? Just a show of hands, if you would. Hands up if you feel more uneasy about general, what used to be everyday social interactions. Hands up if you feel uneasy. Well, that's maybe 80%, maybe more than 80%, nearly everyone. Well, let's talk to our panellists then. Very good evening to you all. Nicola Mendelsohn then. I mean, in a way, is that almost music to the ears of your platform in that people are, if they're not going to meet personally, they're going to interact online?
So much of what we're talking about here tonight is around, our new world. And I certainly hope our new world is one where people can come together, which is also Natasha's question here. How do we feel about people? No, I miss people. I haven't seen people in a very long time. And I can't wait to be in a world where we can interact in the same way as we once did. We're in for a period where we are going to be still more socially distanced from people. But I almost think that there's a kindness in that because we're doing that to protect all of us.
And Benjamin Zephaniah, and I should say that clearly all our sympathies, of course, with George Floyd's family. His memorial service is taking place in Minneapolis, and we will be directly addressing that issue in a moment or two. But just on this issue of social distancing, lack of social interaction, Benjamin Zephaniah, the idea now that people are scared of interacting with each other.
Well, it's natural, but we need to. I remember a few years ago, I was touring around the world, a very, very successful tour. I was in Thailand, I was in India, I was in Pakistan, and I was meeting all these people, shaking their hand, which was okay. But I got to Malaysia, and I met a lady from the British Council, and she was British. And she hugged me. And this electricity went through my body. I realised I haven't been hugged for so long. Me, personally, I am quite nervous about it, just because I know of the reality. Let me lay my cards down here. I've lost 2 members of my family to this COVID-19. My sister was very close to death. And the day she came out of hospital, she came out on a Saturday morning, her husband went in on the afternoon. She got it very badly physically, but he hasn't recovered mentally because of what he saw in that hospital. And when they tell me what they went through, I think, I don't want to go through that. So I can be a tough guy at times, but I'm pretty scared right now.
Benjamin, what a traumatic time for you and your family. Our condolences, our deepest sympathies go to you. Carolina de Saluz, who's in Reading. Hello, Carolina. What would you like to ask?
Hi. Facebook and Google and other platforms announced that they would fight fake news regarding the pandemic. Shouldn't these platforms be more accountable for the content shared?
So we are doing a huge amount, and we manage it in a combination of using, first of all, deep investments that we've made on machine learning and artificial intelligence. But also we have over 35,000 people that we employ around the world that also we need human review because the machine still can't do everything. We've always felt we've had a responsibility to make sure no real world harm comes to people. That's incredibly important. But actually the decision making here is coming from people like the World Health Organization. It's coming from health ministries from different countries and other experts. We're not experts in this area. We look to others to be able to do that for us. And we're a different sort of organization from a traditional publisher like Sky or like a newspaper. We are something different, but we do look to independent third-party experts to be able to advise here.
Well, let's get another question from our virtual audience. Raffaello Marioni in North London has a question. Good evening, Raffaello. What would you like to ask?
Public Health England's BAME report showed how people of colour had between 10 to 50% higher risk of dying from COVID-19 than white British people. Compounded by George Floyd's brutal murder and the powerful memorial we've just seen, it's very clear that institutional racism still defines countries, including our own. As we look to rebuild society after the pandemic, will government and society's institutions finally and meaningfully address systemic racism, or will Black lives continue to not matter?
Well, where do I start? I mean, look, my mother came to Britain in 1956, and her dream was to work for the National Health Service. And that's what she did for most of her life. Most of my family are what we now call frontline workers. Up until recently, they were called low-paid workers. You know, when nurses went on strike for better pay and better conditions, they were mean. And so suddenly, people have got to appreciate what these people do. Now, we do see that Black people are dying in higher numbers, and I don't quite understand the reasons for that. I understand that we tend to live in multi-generational homes. There is a high level of diabetes amongst a lot of the elderly Black community. But not long ago, there was this whole thing about Windrush and Brexit and sending us home and all this kind of stuff. We were kind of, I mean, I used to get racist attacks in the 70s and 80s, and they kind of went away. Suddenly they were back. I felt like I was unwanted in my country. So I think there is a kind of perfect storm, if you like, that's happened recently. And we've just said, we're going to get out on the streets. We can't take it anymore. Things have got to change. And they've got to change on so many levels. I don't normally agree that much with Prince Charles, but when he talks about nature, this is really, really important. We have to change, and I speak as a vegan, our relationship with animals and nature, and we have to change our relationships with ourselves. Black lives really do matter, and we're fed up of them not mattering.
And that is getting lots of applause, unanimous applause there from our audience. Thank you all very much indeed for your input and your insight this evening. And thanks too, of course, to everyone in our virtual studio audience tonight and the 200 audience members we've had across the week. Thank you all for taking part and your questions and your waves. Very good night to you. Thank you very much indeed.